Welcome to this History Channel, where we bring the most fascinating and impactful chapters of history right to your screen. Today, we're diving deep into the rise and fall of some of the most powerful dynasties in China, from the Tang and Yuan dynasties to the resurgence of the Ming Dynasty. This is not just about dates and events, but about the lives, triumphs, and challenges that shape the world we live in today. As you listen to this history unfold, I promise you will want to hear it all. So sit back, relax, and let's explore China's rich and dramatic past, full of battles, innovations, and unforgettable stories. You won't want to miss a single moment. In the early 7th century, China was in turmoil. The Sui Dynasty, 581 to 618, had brought unity and centralization to China after a long period of fragmentation, but it did so through harsh methods. Emperor Yang of Sui, though ambitious, squandered the dynasty's resources on costly military campaigns and extravagant construction projects, including the Grand Canal. These actions drained the empire's coffers and exhausted its population. By 618, the empire was teetering on the brink of collapse. A series of peasant revolts, military rebellions, and the discontent of the ruling class culminated in the assassination of Emperor Yang. The last remnants of the Sui dynasty crumbled, and China once again faced the chaos of disunity. It was in this moment of desperation that Li Yuan, a former Sui official, stepped in. Li Yuan, a skilled general and member of a prominent family in the northern region, seized the opportunity to establish his own rule. He declared himself Emperor Gaozu of the Tang Dynasty in 618, marking the end of the Sui dynasty's brief reign and the beginning of an era that would shape China for centuries to come. The Tang Dynasty's founding was grounded in the unification of China under a strong central government, a system that would later be refined and expanded to create one of the most powerful and influential empires in Chinese history. Emperor Gaozu of Tang faced immense challenges during his early years in power. The empire was fractured, with various factions vying for control. Gaozu's reign marked the beginning of a stabilizing process, where he worked to consolidate power and reform the administration. He maintained the centralized structure established by the Sui dynasty, but was careful to avoid the harshness and excesses that had led to the Sui's downfall. To secure the empire's borders, Emperor Gaozu focused on military reforms, strengthening both the imperial army and the local militias. Under his leadership, the Tang military quickly gained victories against rebellious forces and external threats, including the Eastern Turkic Khaganate. The Tang also solidified control over regions that had previously been unstable, such as the Western Territories and the Silk Road. Economically, the Tang Dynasty prospered during the early years of Gaozu's reign. The government reintroduced the equal field system, which had been used during the Han Dynasty. This system aimed to distribute land fairly, ensuring that all families received land based on their ability to work it. The prosperity from this reform, alongside improvements in agriculture and trade, helped establish the Tang as a formidable power both domestically and internationally. The true golden age of the Tang Dynasty, however, came under the reign of Emperor Taizong, r. 626 to 649, the second ruler of the Tang Dynasty. Taizong, the son of Emperor Gaozu, inherited an empire that was already on the path to greatness, but his vision and military genius propelled it to unprecedented heights. His reign is often considered one of the most successful and prosperous periods in Chinese history. One of Taizong's first challenges was a power struggle within the royal family. In 626, he faced a rebellion led by his own brothers, who were vying for the throne. In what is known as the Xuanwu Gate Incident, Taizong successfully eliminated his rivals, consolidating his position as the emperor. However, despite his violent rise to power, Taizong's reign was characterized by wisdom and stability. Under Taizong, the Tang Dynasty expanded its borders significantly, establishing a strong presence in Central Asia and the Western regions. The Tang military pushed back nomadic groups, such as the Eastern Turks, and extended China's influence into the Darien Basin. These military successes provided the Tang Empire with control over key trade routes, most notably the Silk Road, which brought immense wealth and cultural exchange between China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Domestically, Taizong was known for his administrative reforms and efforts to balance central authority with local autonomy. His government was efficient, and he relied on capable ministers and officials, such as the famous strategist and scholar Wei Zheng. Taizong's reign saw the establishment of a merit-based civil service, where officials were selected based on their abilities rather than their aristocratic lineage. This not only ensured a more competent bureaucracy, but also allowed for the rise of talented individuals from all walks of life. The Tang Dynasty reached its zenith during the reign of Emperor Taizong, and this era of expansion would continue well into the rule of his successors. After stabilizing the internal political situation, the Tang Empire focused on securing its borders and extending its influence across Asia. A critical part of the Tang expansionist strategy was the military, which was highly disciplined and well-equipped under the leadership of Taizong and his successors. One of the first major campaigns of the Tang Dynasty was against the Eastern Turkic Khaganate. The Turks were a nomadic group based in Central Asia, and their raids posed a significant threat to the Tang Empire's western territories. In a series of campaigns from 630 to 640, Taizong decisively defeated the Eastern Turks. These victories not only stabilized the region, but also established the Tang as the dominant power in Central Asia. The Tang Dynasty also sought to control the strategic Silk Road trade routes, which were vital for the empire's economy and military ambitions. By securing these routes, the Tang facilitated trade and diplomatic ties between China and various regions, including Persia, India, and the Byzantine Empire. This international trade brought in valuable goods, including silk, precious stones, spices, and horses, which were integral to the Tang economy. Additionally, the Tang Dynasty expanded its borders into the Tibetan Plateau and the Korean Peninsula. In the west, they established strong alliances with the Uyghurs, a Turkic people who helped secure the frontier. To the south, the Tang had to deal with the Kingdom of Nanzhao in present-day Yunnan, which had ambitions to control the region. The Tang ultimately sent military expeditions to suppress Nanzhao's growing power, although it would continue to be a regional threat for several decades. As the Tang Empire expanded its political and military influence, it also entered a period of unparalleled cultural achievement. This period, often referred to as the Golden Age of Chinese civilization, saw significant advancements in literature, art, music, and philosophy, many of which continue to influence Chinese culture today. The Tang Dynasty is most famous for its contributions to poetry. The Tang period is considered the golden age of Chinese poetry, with poets such as Li Bai, Du Fu, Wang Wei, and Bai Ji producing some of the most enduring works in Chinese literature. These poets were celebrated for their vivid imagery, emotional depth, and technical skill. Their works often reflected the complex social and political environment of the Tang period, as well as personal feelings of longing, nature, and introspection. Li Bai, often regarded as one of China's greatest poets, became legendary for his romanticized view of nature and wine. On the other hand, Du Fu's poetry is noted for its profound social commentary and deep moral concerns, providing a stark contrast to Li Bai's more carefree style. The Tang Dynasty was also a vibrant period for the visual arts. Tang art was characterized by its boldness and richness, seen in the intricacies of Tang Dynasty pottery, sculpture, and painting. One of the most well-known forms of Tang art is the production of figurines, particularly the famous Tang tomb figurines, which included models of horses, soldiers, and dancers. These ceramics, often glazed in bright colors, were placed in tombs to accompany the deceased in the afterlife. The Tang era also saw the development of large-scale murals and the flourishing of Buddhist art, particularly in the Dunhuang caves, where wall paintings depicted scenes from the Buddha's life and various Buddhist teachings. Another significant cultural development during the Tang Dynasty was the emergence of a more cosmopolitan culture, spurred by the active exchanges along the Silk Road. The capital city, Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world at the time, attracting merchants, diplomats, and travelers from across Asia and beyond. This influx of foreign cultures helped introduce new ideas, foods, and customs to China, which were reflected in the art, music, and literature of the period. The Tang Dynasty also stands out for its legal and governmental reforms, which had a profound influence on the development of Chinese governance for centuries. Emperor Taizong, in particular, was instrumental in organizing the Tang legal system, which was based on principles of Confucian morality, with a strong emphasis on order and hierarchy. The Tang legal code, known as the Tang Code, became one of the most important legal texts in Chinese history and would influence the legal systems of neighboring countries, such as Japan and Korea. The Tang Code, enacted in 624, was one of the most advanced legal systems of its time. It was a comprehensive set of laws that covered everything from property rights and family matters to criminal punishment and military discipline. What made the Tang Code unique was its codification of both civil and criminal law into a unified system. It focused on maintaining social order through strict regulations and punishment, but it also included provisions for mitigating circumstances, which allowed judges some discretion in applying the law. One of the most important aspects of the Tang Dynasty's government was the civil service system. Emperor Taizong, in his effort to create a more meritocratic bureaucracy, reformed the imperial examination system. This system was designed to select government officials based on their knowledge of Confucian texts, ensuring that the most capable individuals would rise to positions of power, regardless of their social status. While the system initially applied only to the highest-ranking officials, it was gradually expanded over the centuries to include a broader range of positions, contributing to the development of a highly competent and centralized bureaucracy. The Tang Dynasty is often considered a period of relative social liberation for women, compared to other periods of Chinese history. Women enjoyed more autonomy and freedom than in many later dynasties, and they were involved in politics, the arts, and commerce. While Confucianism still dictated much of social behavior, the Tang Dynasty's cosmopolitan and open society allowed women more opportunities in public life. One of the most prominent figures of the Tang period was Empress Wu Zetian, 624 to 705, the only woman in Chinese history to rule as an emperor in her own right. Wu Zetian's rise to power was both extraordinary and controversial. She initially entered the imperial palace as a concubine of Emperor Taizong, but after his death, she became the concubine of his son, Emperor Gaozong. Following Gaozong's incapacitation, Wu Zetian effectively took control of the government, acting as regent and eventually declaring herself emperor in 690, founding the Yuan Dynasty, 690 to 705, before returning the throne to the Tang Dynasty. Wu Zetian's reign was marked by her centralization of power, reforms in the government, and encouragement of the civil service exams. She is known for promoting the advancement of women in official positions and for her patronage of Buddhism, which gained prominence during her rule. While her reign was authoritarian and at times brutal, Wu Zetian's legacy remains significant for her influence on the Tang Dynasty and her ability to navigate a patriarchal system to become China's sole female emperor. Even outside the court, women played important roles in Tang society. The Tang capital of Chang'an was a bustling metropolis, and women from elite families could engage in cultural and intellectual life. Some women were known to be poets, artists, and musicians, and several prominent Tang female poets, like the famous writer and courtesan Xue Tao, contributed to the cultural legacy of the period. In the social and cultural sphere, Tang women had more leeway to express themselves and pursue education than in many other periods of Chinese history. Buddhism became deeply entrenched in Chinese society during the Tang Dynasty, significantly influencing the cultural and intellectual landscape. By the time of the Tang Dynasty, Buddhism had already been present in China for several centuries, introduced along the Silk Road from India. However, it was under the Tang emperors that Buddhism became an integral part of Chinese life and thought. Emperor Taizong, despite his Confucian values, was initially tolerant of Buddhism and recognized its potential as a stabilizing force. He was a patron of Buddhist monasteries, particularly those along the Silk Road. Emperor Taizong's open-mindedness set the stage for subsequent rulers, particularly Empress Wu Zetian, who became an outspoken advocate for Buddhism. Wu Zetian supported Buddhist institutions and was instrumental in the promotion of the Buddhist religion as the state religion during her reign. The Tang period saw the construction of numerous Buddhist temples and the translation of key Buddhist texts into Chinese. One of the most famous figures in the history of Chinese Buddhism during the Tang Dynasty was Xuanzang, a monk who journeyed to India in the 7th century to obtain Buddhist scriptures. Xuanzang's journey was not only a religious pilgrimage, but also a diplomatic and cultural mission, as it helped foster Sino-Indian relations. Upon his return to China in 645, Xuanzang translated many key texts that had a profound influence on the development of Chinese Buddhism. However, Buddhism's rise also led to tension with the established Confucian and Taoist institutions. The growing wealth of Buddhist monasteries and their political influence prompted periodic crackdowns on the religion. The most notable of these occurred during the reign of Emperor Wuzong, r. 840 to 846, who launched the infamous Great Anti-Buddhist Persecution. Thousands of Buddhist temples were destroyed, and Buddhist monks and nuns were forced to return to secular life. Despite this, Buddhism survived and continued to thrive in China, albeit with periodic setbacks. The Tang Dynasty's economy was one of the most advanced in the medieval world. It was marked by growth in agriculture, trade, and urbanization, which contributed to the empire's political stability and military success. The state maintained strong control over land distribution through systems like the equal field system, which guaranteed that land was distributed fairly based on a family's size and ability to work the land. This helped maintain agricultural productivity, which was vital for sustaining the large population of the empire. The Tang Dynasty was known for its extensive trade networks, both overland and maritime. The Silk Road, a vast network of trade routes that connected China to Central Asia, the Middle East, and beyond, played a critical role in the Tang economy. Tang merchants traded silk, tea, ceramics, and paper, all of which were highly prized commodities. The empire's control over key portions of the Silk Road allowed it to maintain political and economic dominance over much of Asia. Additionally, maritime trade flourished during the Tang period. The Tang Navy protected trade routes along the southern coast of China, facilitating exchanges with Southeast Asia, India, and the Arabian Peninsula. The growth of ports, such as Guangzhou and Xuanzhou, allowed Chinese merchants to reach distant markets, and the influx of foreign goods further enriched Tang society. Luxury items, including Persian carpets, Indian spices, and Arabian glassware, became common in Tang cities. The exchange of goods was not the only form of exchange. Cultural and technological ideas, including the spread of Islam, also found their way to China through these maritime routes. The Tang Dynasty's economic success also led to the growth of urban centers. Chang'an, the capital, became one of the world's largest cities, with a population that may have exceeded 1 million people. As the political heart of the empire, Chang'an was a thriving hub of commerce, culture, and politics. The city's layout reflected the imperial ideology, with its grand palaces, temples, and markets, as well as an intricate system of streets and districts that helped manage the enormous population. While the Tang Dynasty reached its height during the reigns of Emperor Taizong and Empress Wu Zetian, it began to experience significant challenges during the later years of the 8th century. The central government, which had been strong and efficient, began to weaken due to internal strife, corruption, and the increasing power of local military governors. One of the key factors contributing to the decline of the Tang Dynasty was the weakening of the imperial court's authority. The rise of regional military governors, known as jidushi, began to fragment the empire. Initially, these governors were appointed by the emperor to manage distant regions and maintain order. However, over time, they grew more powerful and independent, often controlling their own armies and lands. This decentralization of power undermined the unity of the empire, as these military leaders began to challenge the authority of the emperor. The Tang government struggled to manage the increasingly powerful regional military leaders, who were often more loyal to their own interests than to the central government. The jidushi system, intended to keep the empire unified, had inadvertently created local warlords who undermined the Tang Emperor's control. The court's attempts to regain control of these provinces led to frequent military campaigns and political instability. Corruption within the imperial court further exacerbated the problem. By the mid-8th century, the once efficient bureaucracy of the Tang Dynasty had become riddled with inefficiency and graft. The court was dominated by powerful eunuchs, who held significant influence over the emperor and often used their power for personal gain. The increasing role of eunuchs in politics led to resentment among the aristocracy and military officials, further destabilizing the empire. One of the most devastating events in the history of the Tang Dynasty was the Lushan Rebellion, which began in 755. Lushan was a military governor of one of the most important provinces in the Tang Empire, and he was a key figure in the imperial bureaucracy. However, despite his importance, Lushan grew disillusioned with the central government's declining power and the corruption of the court. Motivated by personal ambition, he decided to rebel against the Tang Dynasty. Lushan's rebellion was catastrophic for the Tang Empire. In 755, he launched a full-scale revolt, capturing the capital city of Chang'an in 756 and forcing Emperor Xuanzong to flee the city. The rebellion quickly spread throughout the empire, drawing in disaffected military leaders and regional warlords. For nearly 8 years, the Tang Dynasty was embroiled in a brutal civil war that ravaged much of the empire. Lushan's forces, although initially successful, were eventually defeated, but not before the empire was severely weakened. The rebellion caused significant casualties, with some estimates suggesting that over 1 million people died as a result of the conflict. The economic and military toll on the empire was immense, and the Tang Dynasty never fully recovered from the damage. While the rebellion itself was eventually suppressed by the Tang forces, the aftermath left the empire divided and weakened. The imperial court's control over regional military governors became even more tenuous, and the rebellion exposed the vulnerability of the Tang Dynasty to internal rebellion. Emperor Xuanzong, who had ruled during the early years of the rebellion, was forced to abdicate in 756. His successor, Emperor Suzong, attempted to stabilize the empire and restore imperial authority, but the damage had already been done. The Tang government never regained the level of central control it had once enjoyed, and the jidushi system continued to undermine the power of the emperor. The aftermath of the Lushan Rebellion left the Tang Empire in a state of disarray. While the rebellion itself was eventually quelled, it had far-reaching consequences for the dynasty. In the years following the rebellion, the Tang government was never able to restore the centralized control that had once characterized the empire. The military governors, who had gained significant power during the rebellion, continued to operate as independent warlords, further weakening the central authority of the emperor. The economic toll of the rebellion also had a lasting impact. The destruction caused by the conflict, combined with widespread famine and plague, left much of the Tang economy in shambles. Agriculture, which had been the backbone of the empire's prosperity, was severely disrupted, and trade routes that had been crucial to the empire's wealth were damaged. The loss of life during the rebellion and the ensuing years of instability further strained the population, leading to widespread poverty and social unrest. In the aftermath of the rebellion, the Tang court made several attempts to reform the government and restore order, but the damage was irreparable. The Jidushi system, which had been a source of strength in the empire's early years, had now become a significant liability. The military governors had grown too powerful, and many of them had little regard for the authority of the emperor. The court's efforts to curb their power were often unsuccessful, as these local warlords had their own armies and enjoyed the loyalty of their subjects. This decentralization of power was further exacerbated by the rise of eunuchs in the imperial court. After the Lushan rebellion, eunuchs gained even greater influence in the palace, manipulating imperial succession and political appointments to their advantage. Their involvement in court politics contributed to the overall instability of the dynasty, as they became embroiled in power struggles that further weakened the imperial government. By the late 8th century, the Tang Dynasty was a shadow of its former self. Though it continued to exist for nearly another century, the empire's decline was inevitable. The last decades of the Tang were marked by civil wars, rebellions, and a steady erosion of central authority. The imperial court, once a powerful center of political and cultural life, had become increasingly irrelevant in the face of local military rulers who controlled large swaths of the empire. As the Tang Dynasty's central authority continued to erode in the aftermath of the Lushan rebellion, the empire entered a period of fragmentation. By the 9th century, the once cohesive structure of the Tang state had been undermined by the increasing power of regional military leaders who governed their territories with growing independence. These military governors, known as Jidushi, had been an integral part of the Tang administrative structure since the early years of the dynasty, but by this point, they had effectively become local warlords, challenging the emperor's authority. The Jidushi were originally appointed by the emperor to oversee frontier regions and maintain order. However, as the central government weakened, these governors began to consolidate power in their own hands. They commanded their own armies, collected taxes, and ruled their territories with little regard for imperial directives. In many cases, these warlords maintained more control over their regions than the emperor did over the capital. Some military governors even established hereditary dynasties within their territories, further fragmenting the empire. One of the most powerful and influential of these regional warlords was Yuan, who controlled much of the central plains of China by the early 10th century. Yuan began his career as a military officer during the Lushan rebellion and later became the governor of several provinces. As the Tang central government weakened, Yuan seized the opportunity to further consolidate his power. In 907, he forced the abdication of the last Tang emperor, Emperor Ai, marking the formal end of the Tang dynasty. Yuan's rise to power highlights the deep fragmentation within the empire. By the time he ascended to the throne as the ruler of the later Yuan Dynasty, the Tang Dynasty's territorial unity had effectively dissolved. The decentralization of power, combined with the increasing influence of military governors, contributed to the downfall of the once mighty Tang Empire. The city of Chang'an, once a symbol of the Tang Dynasty's glory, began to decline as the central authority weakened. Chang'an, which had been one of the largest and most prosperous cities in the world during the Tang Dynasty's peak, gradually lost its prominence as regional warlords and military governors took control of various parts of China. With the breakdown of central control, the imperial capital was no longer able to maintain its status as the hub of political, economic, and cultural life in the empire. The fall of Chang'an can be attributed to several factors. First, the Lushan rebellion had already severely damaged the city. The rebellion's destruction, along with the subsequent years of warfare, caused significant loss of life and economic disruption. Although the city recovered to some extent in the years following the rebellion, the continuing instability and the shift of political power to regional governors eroded its importance. In addition to the internal strife and corruption that plagued the Tang government, external pressures further weakened the capital. The Tang military, which had once been a formidable force, was now stretched thin, struggling to maintain control over distant regions of the empire. As military leaders focused more on defending their own territories, the capital became increasingly vulnerable to raids and incursions by neighboring states and nomadic tribes. As the Tang capital declined, other cities, such as Luoyang, rose in prominence. However, the overall decline of the empire led to the rise of smaller regional kingdoms that fragmented China into numerous rival states. The once great city of Chang'an was left in ruins, symbolizing the end of the Tang Dynasty's power and influence. The final years of the Tang Dynasty were marked by chaos, rebellion, and the fragmentation of the empire. By the late 9th century, the emperor's power had been reduced to little more than a figurehead. With the rise of local warlords, the central government had little ability to enforce its will, and the once mighty imperial bureaucracy had collapsed under the weight of corruption, inefficiency, and power struggles. In 907, Yuan, a former military officer, took advantage of the Tang's weakening position and forced Emperor Ai to abdicate the throne. Yuan declared himself the ruler of the new later Yuan Dynasty, marking the official end of the Tang Dynasty. The transition from the Tang to the period known as the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms was a time of significant political fragmentation and instability. During this period, China was divided into several rival kingdoms, each ruled by military warlords. The 5 Dynasties refers to a series of short-lived ruling states that emerged in northern China following the collapse of the Tang, while the 10 Kingdoms were a collection of independent states in the southern part of the empire. This period was characterized by constant warfare, political intrigue, and a lack of unity. Despite the collapse of the Tang Dynasty, many aspects of Tang culture and governance survived in the form of the new states that emerged during the 5 Dynasties period. The influence of Tang law, administration, and cultural traditions continued to shape Chinese society, even as political fragmentation prevailed. The fall of the Tang Dynasty marked the end of a golden age in Chinese history, but its legacy lived on in the subsequent dynasties that would follow. The period following the fall of the Tang Dynasty also saw the continued rise of Buddhism, which had become deeply integrated into Chinese society during the Tang period. Although the Tang rulers had at times attempted to suppress Buddhism, the religion continued to thrive in China, particularly in the form of Chan Buddhism, known as Zen in Japan. This was a time of religious and cultural ferment, as China faced the challenges of rebuilding and redefining itself after the fall of the Tang. Despite the eventual fall of the Tang Dynasty, its legacy endured for centuries, particularly in the realm of Chinese governance. One of the most enduring aspects of the Tang Dynasty's rule was its system of centralized governance and the civil service examination system, both of which had a profound impact on the political landscape of China for generations. The civil service examination system, which was first refined during the Tang Dynasty, became the foundation of Chinese bureaucracy for the rest of the imperial era. This system allowed individuals to rise to positions of power based on merit rather than birthright, which was a significant departure from earlier dynasties that were based on aristocratic lineage. During the Tang period, the exams focused on Confucian texts, and officials were expected to be well-versed in Confucian philosophy, history, and law. Over time, the system became more standardized and widespread, and it provided a model for other East Asian nations, such as Japan and Korea, to adopt. The civil service exams helped create a highly educated and efficient bureaucracy, which was key to the functioning of the empire. Though the Tang Dynasty's central authority weakened in the later years, the foundation laid by the dynasty in terms of governance, particularly through merit-based selection of officials, persisted. Even during the Five Dynasties period that followed the Tang, many of the reforms that originated under the Tang continued to influence the formation of government structures and the selection of bureaucrats. Moreover, the Tang legal code, which was comprehensive and detailed, was another important aspect of governance that had a long-lasting impact. The Tang Code, one of the most sophisticated legal frameworks of the time, was used as a model for future Chinese dynasties and other East Asian countries. The legal principles of the Tang Dynasty, which emphasized maintaining order and justice, continued to inform Chinese law for centuries, and many aspects of Tang legal practices were incorporated into later dynasties, including the Song and Ming Dynasties. The cultural achievements of the Tang Dynasty have left an indelible mark on Chinese history and beyond. The Tang period is often considered the pinnacle of Chinese civilization, particularly in the fields of literature, art, music, and architecture. The influence of Tang culture extended far beyond China, with neighboring countries such as Japan, Korea, and Vietnam drawing inspiration from Tang traditions. One of the most significant cultural achievements of the Tang Dynasty was the flourishing of poetry. The Tang period produced some of the greatest poets in Chinese history, including Li Bai, Du Fu, Wang Wei, and Bai Jui. These poets not only elevated Chinese literature to new heights, but also shaped the development of Chinese poetry for generations to come. The works of these poets were characterized by their vivid imagery, emotional depth, and philosophical reflections on nature, politics, and society. Li Bai, for example, is celebrated for his romanticized portrayals of nature and his love of wine, while Du Fu's poetry is known for its moral seriousness and social critique. These two poets represent the diversity of the Tang poetic tradition, with Li Bai's work often reflecting personal emotion and a carefree attitude toward life, and Du Fu's work focusing on social justice and the challenges of the time. The Tang period also saw the development of the regulated verse, liushi, a strict poetic form that became a hallmark of Chinese poetry for centuries. In addition to poetry, Tang art reached new levels of sophistication. Tang ceramics, particularly the famous Tang tomb figurines, are considered masterpieces of ancient Chinese art. These colorful, glazed figurines were made to accompany the deceased in the afterlife, and they often depicted animals, soldiers, dancers, and court officials. Tang ceramics were exported to other parts of Asia, and their influence can be seen in the pottery of neighboring cultures, particularly in Japan and Korea. Tang art also included monumental Buddhist sculptures and wall paintings, such as those found in the Dunhuang caves. These paintings, which depict scenes from the life of the Buddha, are some of the finest examples of Buddhist art in the world. The Tang Dynasty's embrace of Buddhism had a lasting impact on Chinese culture, and the period's artistic and religious works continue to be admired today. The Tang Dynasty's influence extended far beyond China's borders, particularly in terms of trade and cultural exchange. One of the most significant aspects of the Tang Empire was its role in the Silk Road, the ancient trade route that connected China with Central Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe. The Tang Dynasty's control over key sections of the Silk Road allowed China to engage in trade with distant lands, and the goods that passed through China enriched both the empire and its trading partners. Tang China was a major player in international trade, exporting silk, ceramics, tea, and paper, while importing spices, precious stones, and other luxury goods from the West. The Tang government established strong diplomatic and trade relations with the countries of Central Asia, Persia, India, and the Arabian Peninsula. Tang merchants and diplomats traveled along the Silk Road, exchanging goods, ideas, and cultural practices with other civilizations. One of the most famous figures of the Tang period who helped foster these international connections was the Buddhist monk Xuanzang. Xuanzang's journey to India in the 7th century to obtain Buddhist scriptures is one of the most famous episodes in the history of the Silk Road. His travels not only facilitated the exchange of religious ideas between China and India, but also helped establish closer ties between the two civilizations. Xuanzang's journey inspired many subsequent expeditions and laid the foundation for the transmission of Buddhist texts from India to China. The Tang Dynasty also saw the introduction of foreign goods and ideas into China. Persian carpets, glassware from the Middle East, and spices from India were highly prized in Tang China, and they influenced Chinese art, cuisine, and culture. The Tang period was a time of cultural synthesis, where ideas from Buddhism, Islam, and other foreign religions and philosophies mingled with traditional Chinese thought, creating a cosmopolitan society in the capital of Chang'an. This era of trade and cultural exchange during the Tang Dynasty laid the groundwork for the development of global trade networks in later centuries. The Tang's engagement with the Silk Road and its promotion of international relations helped shape China's position as a central hub in the global economy for centuries to come. The influence of the Tang Dynasty extended far beyond China's borders, particularly in East Asia, where neighboring countries such as Japan, Korea, and Vietnam adopted many aspects of Tang culture, governance, and religion. Among the most influenced nations was Japan, which borrowed extensively from Tang China, especially in the areas of government, culture, religion, and the arts. During the early 7th century, Japan was undergoing significant political and cultural change, and its leaders looked to China as a model for governance and civilization. The Japanese court, particularly under the reign of Emperor Tenmu and Empress Jito, sent multiple missions to China to study the Tang system of government and bureaucracy. Japan adopted the Tang-inspired imperial system, and many elements of the Tang legal code were incorporated into Japan's own legal framework. The Tang civil service examination system, while never fully adopted in Japan, influenced the selection of officials and the development of a more merit-based bureaucracy. In addition to political reforms, Japan also borrowed elements of Tang culture, such as art, literature, and architecture. Chinese-style Buddhism, which had become a prominent religion during the Tang Dynasty, was introduced to Japan, and many early Buddhist temples in Japan were modeled on Tang designs. The influence of Tang poetry and literature can also be seen in Japanese works from the period, and many early Japanese poets and scholars were influenced by Tang literary styles and themes. The most significant influence of the Tang Dynasty on Japan, however, was in the realm of Buddhism. Chinese Buddhism, particularly the Chan Zen school, had a profound impact on the development of Japanese Buddhism. Chinese monks, scholars, and Buddhist artifacts were brought to Japan, further cementing the importance of Buddhism in Japanese culture and society. This influence shaped the development of Japan's religious practices for centuries, and Buddhism remains a central aspect of Japanese life and culture to this day. The relationship between the Tang Dynasty and Korea was equally important, as the Tang played a central role in the political and cultural development of the Korean peninsula. The Tang Empire had extensive interactions with the kingdoms of Korea, most notably the Kingdom of Silla. These interactions, which were both diplomatic and military, had a profound effect on the development of Korean statecraft and culture during the Tang period. The most significant of these interactions occurred in the 7th century, when the Tang Dynasty helped the Kingdom of Silla defeat its rival Kingdom of Baekje in 660 and the Kingdom of Goguryeo in 668. This military alliance between the Tang and Silla ultimately led to the unification of the Korean peninsula under the Silla dynasty, marking a significant turning point in Korean history. The Tang military support of Silla not only ensured the kingdom's dominance over the other Korean states, but also allowed for the introduction of Tang-style governance and cultural practices to Korea. Following the unification of Korea, the Silla court adopted many aspects of Tang political structures. Like China, Korea established an imperial system of government, and the Silla aristocracy modeled its administrative practices on those of the Tang Dynasty. The Tang-style bureaucracy, which included a central imperial court, local governors, and an elaborate system of civil service exams, was introduced in Korea, though it was adapted to fit the specific needs of the Korean state. Culturally, the influence of Tang China was evident in the adoption of Chinese writing, which was used extensively in Korea for official records, literature, and poetry. Korean scholars studied Chinese classics and Confucianism, and many aspects of Chinese education and philosophy became ingrained in Korean society. Buddhism, which had been introduced to Korea from China and India, flourished during the Tang period, and many of the artistic traditions associated with Chinese Buddhist temples and monasteries were incorporated into Korean architecture and sculpture. In the later part of the Tang Dynasty, as the central government in China weakened, Korea's relationship with the Tang also shifted. The weakening of Tang authority allowed Silla to become more independent, and by the 9th century, Korea had established its own political and cultural identity. Nevertheless, the legacy of Tang China in Korea remained strong, particularly in the areas of governance, culture, and religion. The Tang Dynasty's influence on Vietnam, particularly during the early centuries of the dynasty's rule, was less direct than in Japan or Korea, but it was still significant. Vietnam, which had been under Chinese rule for over a millennium, had long been influenced by Chinese culture, politics, and religion. The Tang period, which saw the peak of China's influence in Southeast Asia, had a lasting impact on Vietnam's development. During the Tang period, Vietnam, known as Annam in Chinese, was a part of China's empire, though the region maintained a degree of autonomy. The Tang Dynasty's expansion and consolidation of power over southern regions, including present-day Vietnam, further entrenched Chinese influence in the region. The Vietnamese court adopted many aspects of Tang Chinese governance, including the use of Chinese characters and the Chinese bureaucratic system. The Tang legal code also had a significant influence on Vietnamese law and elements of Chinese culture, including Confucianism and Buddhism, were adopted by the Vietnamese ruling elite. One of the most significant impacts of Tang rule in Vietnam was the spread of Buddhism. While Buddhism had been present in Vietnam since the 3rd century, it was during the Tang period that it became more deeply integrated into Vietnamese society. Buddhist teachings from China and India, including the Chan, Zen school of Buddhism, began to influence the development of Vietnamese Buddhist practices. As in China and Korea, Buddhist temples and monasteries were constructed, and Buddhist art and iconography began to play an important role in Vietnamese culture. Despite the influence of the Tang Dynasty, Vietnam remained largely resistant to direct Chinese control, and the relationship between the Tang court and the Vietnamese kingdoms was often tense. The Vietnamese people, particularly under the leadership of local dynasties, maintained their distinct cultural identity, even as they adopted many Chinese practices. Eventually, Vietnam would achieve greater autonomy from China, but the legacy of Tang rule continued to influence Vietnamese governance, culture, and religion for centuries. The Tang Dynasty's military was one of the most advanced and effective fighting forces of its time, playing a crucial role in both the expansion and defense of the empire. The Tang military was a well-organized and disciplined force, and its innovations set the stage for military strategy and organization for centuries. During the early years of the dynasty, the Tang rulers established a comprehensive and efficient military system, which was critical in consolidating their control over China after the collapse of the Sui dynasty. The backbone of the Tang military was its highly structured and hierarchical organization, which divided the army into various divisions based on function and strategic importance. The Tang military had a standing professional army, as well as a reserve force made up of local militias and conscripted soldiers. The army was organized into units of increasing size, from individual soldiers to regiments, brigades, and large armies. Each level had its own command structure, ensuring a clear chain of command and an effective communication system. The Tang military also placed significant emphasis on the role of cavalry, and it became one of the most effective mounted forces in Asia. The use of cavalry was integral to the Tang's successes in defending its vast borders and in expanding its empire into Central Asia. The Tang cavalry was known for its mobility and effectiveness in both offensive and defensive operations. The Tang also developed new cavalry techniques, including the use of armored cavalry and mounted archers, which gave them a distinct advantage in battle. One of the most important innovations of the Tang military was the creation of the phubbing system, a unique form of military conscription that replaced the previous, more centralized methods of recruitment. Under the phubbing system, local communities were responsible for supplying soldiers when needed, and the soldiers would return to their civilian lives after their service. This system allowed the Tang Empire to maintain a large and well-trained standing army without overburdening the state's resources. It also ensured that the soldiers had a personal stake in defending their communities, which made them more committed to the empire's defense. The phubbing system proved highly successful in the early years of the Tang Dynasty, as it allowed the empire to maintain a large, effective military without relying solely on professional soldiers. The system enabled the Tang to field massive armies quickly and mobilize troops from across the empire, contributing to their military success in campaigns against external enemies, such as the Turkic Khaganates and the Tibetan Empire, as well as in internal conflicts, such as the Lushan Rebellion. While the Tang Dynasty is often remembered for its army and cavalry, its naval forces were also an essential component of its military power. The Tang Empire had a significant maritime presence, which allowed it to defend its coastal regions, protect vital trade routes, and project power across the seas. The development of the Tang Navy was driven by the need to secure China's coastal borders and to maintain control over vital shipping routes, particularly those along the Silk Road. The Tang naval forces were primarily focused on the defense of China's eastern and southern coasts, where they protected important ports and cities. The empire's navy was well equipped with a variety of ships, ranging from smaller war vessels to large ocean-going ships capable of carrying substantial numbers of soldiers. These ships were often armed with crossbows, spears, and other weapons, and they were designed for both combat and transport. One of the most important aspects of the Tang Navy was its role in safeguarding maritime trade. The Tang Empire had extensive trade connections, both along the Silk Road and via maritime routes. These trade routes brought valuable goods, such as silk, ceramics, and spices, from China to other parts of Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe. The Tang Navy was essential in protecting these trade routes from pirates, hostile states, and other threats. The naval power of the Tang Dynasty was also critical in its relations with neighboring countries. The empire's navy enabled it to project power beyond its borders and to maintain influence over maritime trade routes in Southeast Asia, the Indian Ocean, and even as far as the Arabian Peninsula. The Tang Navy played an important role in China's interactions with foreign states, both in terms of trade and diplomacy. The Tang naval forces were not only a military tool, but also an important symbol of the empire's strength and reach. The Navy's ability to control the seas allowed the Tang to maintain its dominance in East Asia and to secure its place as a major player in the global trade networks of the time. The Tang Navy also contributed to the spread of Chinese culture, technology, and influence throughout Asia, particularly through the establishment of maritime trade routes that linked China with the wider world. Despite the early successes and innovations of the Tang military, the empire began to experience a decline in its military effectiveness by the late 8th and early 9th centuries. As the Tang government weakened and regional military governors gained more power, the once highly centralized military system started to fragment. Local military commanders, known as Jadushi, began to operate independently from the central government, which led to a breakdown in the coordination and discipline of the army. The rise of Jadushi during the Tang Dynasty had significant consequences for the empire's military. Originally appointed by the emperor to maintain order in frontier regions, the Jadushi were given considerable autonomy and control over their military forces. Over time, however, many of these military governors grew increasingly independent, sometimes even challenging the authority of the central government. By the time of the Lushan Rebellion in 755, the Jadushi had become more powerful than ever, and they played a critical role in the conflict. While the Central Tang army struggled to respond effectively to the rebellion, the Jadushi armies, which were more attuned to local conditions, were able to fight more effectively. However, the rebellion itself further undermined the power of the central military, and the Tang government was unable to regain full control over its military forces. The decline of the Tang military was also due in part to the corruption and incompetence within the imperial court. As the emperors became more distant from the realities of military life, military commanders often took advantage of the situation, leading to poor strategic decisions and ineffective leadership. Furthermore, the increasing power of the Jadushi led to internal conflicts and rebellions within the empire, further weakening the Tang military's ability to respond to external threats. By the time of the Tang Dynasty's collapse in the early 10th century, the once proud military was in disarray. Local warlords and military commanders, many of whom had risen through the ranks of the Jadushi, began to carve out their own independent states, effectively ending the Tang Empire's control over China. The fragmentation of the military, combined with the rise of regional military powers, contributed to the final collapse of the Tang Dynasty and the transition into the 5 Dynasties and 10 Kingdoms period. The Tang Dynasty, like previous Chinese dynasties, was heavily influenced by Confucianism, which provided the ideological foundation for its political and social structures. Confucianism, with its emphasis on hierarchy, moral behavior, and the importance of education, shaped the Tang government and society. The Tang emperors saw themselves as the embodiment of Confucian virtues and upheld the moral principles that Confucius taught, such as filial piety, respect for authority, and the importance of maintaining social order. Confucianism during the Tang Dynasty was not simply an abstract philosophy. It was deeply embedded in the functioning of the state. The Tang Dynasty is known for its development of the civil service examination system, which was based on Confucian texts. This system aimed to select officials based on their knowledge of Confucian classics, ensuring that the empire's administrators were not only well-educated but also morally upright. The civil service exams, which were instituted in the Tang period, would become a cornerstone of Chinese governance for centuries to come, affecting subsequent dynasties such as the Song, Yuan, and Ming. Confucianism also had a profound influence on the Tang social hierarchy. It reinforced the traditional values of family loyalty, respect for elders, and the importance of maintaining social order. The emperor, seen as the Son of Heaven, was considered the highest moral authority in the land, and his reign was justified by his ability to rule in accordance with Confucian values. The emperor's responsibility was not just to govern, but to provide moral leadership for the entire empire. This idea was reinforced through Confucian rituals and ceremonies, which are designed to maintain harmony between the heavens, the emperor, and the people. Despite Confucianism's dominance, the Tang Dynasty also saw a more inclusive approach to governance. While Confucian values were essential, the dynasty allowed for the coexistence of other philosophies and religions, such as Taoism and Buddhism, creating a more diverse intellectual and religious landscape. The blending of Confucianism with Taoist and Buddhist thought during the Tang period contributed to a rich cultural and intellectual environment that fostered creativity and philosophical development. Buddhism played an increasingly important role in the Tang Dynasty, both as a religious and philosophical system. Introduced to China from India centuries earlier, Buddhism had already begun to establish a strong presence by the time of the Tang Dynasty. However, it was during the Tang period that Buddhism became deeply integrated into Chinese culture, both as a state religion and as a vital part of society's religious and intellectual fabric. The Tang emperors were generally tolerant of Buddhism and supported its growth, especially during the reign of Emperor Taizong, r. 626 to 649, and Empress Wu Zetian, r. 690 to 705. Empress Wu, in particular, was a major patron of Buddhism, and her reign saw the rise of Buddhism as the state religion. Her efforts to promote Buddhism were aimed at consolidating her own power, but they also had long-lasting effects on Chinese religion and culture. Under her rule, the number of Buddhist temples and monasteries grew, and many Buddhist texts were translated into Chinese. Buddhism's rise during the Tang Dynasty was facilitated by the efforts of influential monks and scholars, such as Xuanzang, whose pilgrimage to India to obtain Buddhist scriptures is one of the most famous stories in Chinese history. Xuanzang's journey not only brought a wealth of Buddhist texts back to China, but also helped to establish closer cultural and intellectual ties between China and India. His translations of key Buddhist texts into Chinese helped to spread Buddhist teachings, particularly those related to Mahayana Buddhism, and were instrumental in the development of Chinese Buddhist schools. Despite its growth, Buddhism faced resistance from some segments of Chinese society, particularly from Confucian scholars and Taoist priests. Confucian officials viewed Buddhism as a foreign religion that undermined traditional Chinese values, especially filial piety and respect for the family structure. Taoists, who saw Buddhism as a competing philosophy, also opposed its spread. Tensions between these groups led to periodic conflicts, including the infamous Great Anti-Buddhist Persecution during the reign of Emperor Wuzong, r. 840 to 846, when thousands of Buddhist monasteries were destroyed and Buddhist clergy were forced to return to secular life. Nevertheless, Buddhism's influence persisted, and its integration into Tang society had a profound impact on Chinese culture. Buddhist art, including statues, paintings, and cave murals, flourished during this period. The Tang period also saw the development of Chan, Zen, Buddhism, which emphasized meditation and direct experience over scripture and ritual. Chan Buddhism would go on to become one of the most influential forms of Buddhism in East Asia, particularly in China, Japan, and Korea. Buddhism's influence on Chinese philosophy was also significant. The Tang period saw the blending of Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist ideas into a unique intellectual tradition. This synthesis of philosophical systems led to new approaches to ethics, cosmology, and metaphysics, and it had a lasting impact on the development of Chinese thought. Taoism, one of China's indigenous religious and philosophical traditions, also played an important role during the Tang Dynasty. Taoism, which emphasizes living in harmony with the Tao. The Wei focuses on naturalness, spontaneity, and simplicity. During the Tang period, Taoism was integrated into the imperial ideology, with Taoist priests and scholars playing significant roles in the court and in statecraft. Taoism's influence on the Tang Dynasty was particularly evident in the reign of Emperor Taizong, r. 626 to 649, who maintained a close relationship with Taoist priests and sought their advice on matters of governance and military strategy. Taoism, with its focus on cosmic order and the natural world, provided an important counterbalance to the Confucian emphasis on social order and hierarchy. While Confucianism was the foundation of the Tang political system, Taoist ideas were often invoked to justify the emperor's rule as a reflection of the natural order of the universe. Taoism was also an important influence on Tang culture, particularly in the realms of art and literature. Taoist themes of nature, immortality, and the balance of opposites permeated Tang poetry and painting. Taoist practices, such as alchemy and meditation, were integrated into Chinese intellectual life, and Taoist temples and rituals were common throughout the empire. While Buddhism and Confucianism were more widely practiced during the Tang period, Taoism remained an integral part of the spiritual and philosophical landscape. Taoism's influence continued to shape Chinese culture for centuries, particularly in the areas of medicine, astronomy, and metaphysics. The Tang Dynasty's embrace of Taoism, along with its support for Confucianism and Buddhism, contributed to the rich religious and intellectual environment that characterized this golden age of Chinese civilization. The Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907, is often regarded as the golden age of Chinese literature, particularly in the realm of poetry. The era produced a remarkable array of poets who contributed to a literary tradition that continues to influence Chinese literature today. The poetry of the Tang period was characterized by its emotional depth, vivid imagery, and mastery of form. Tang poets were able to express a wide range of human experiences, from personal reflections and nature's beauty to social concerns and political critique. The most famous poets of the Tang Dynasty include Li Bai, Du Fu, Wang Wei, Bai Juyi, and Gao Shi, all of whom played pivotal roles in the development of Chinese poetry. Li Bai, known for his romantic and whimsical style, often celebrated nature, the joys of wine, and the search for personal freedom. His poems, filled with deep imagery and a sense of spontaneity, have become some of the most beloved works in Chinese literary history. Du Fu, on the other hand, is considered the poet of social conscience. His works are filled with reflections on the suffering of the common people and the state of the empire during his time. While his poetry is known for its personal sorrow, Du Fu's works also reflect his deep commitment to Confucian ideals of morality and the well-being of society. Wang Wei, another prominent Tang poet, was known for his mastery of landscape poetry. His poems often depicted the beauty of nature, and his work reflects the influence of both Buddhism and Taoism. Wang Wei was also a painter, and his poetry was often paired with his art, creating a harmonious blend of words and images. Bai Juyi, a poet and government official, became famous for his simple, direct style. His poetry often addressed issues of governance and social justice, as well as personal longing and the natural world. Bai Juyi's works were widely read across all classes in Tang society, from the common people to the imperial court. The Tang period saw the development of the regulated verse, lushi, a strict form of poetry with precise tonal patterns and a rigid structure. This style of poetry was particularly popular among scholars and poets of the period, and it became one of the most enduring poetic forms in Chinese history. The regulated verse allowed poets to express their creativity within the constraints of a fixed structure, leading to a unique form of artistic expression. In addition to the regulated verse, the Tang Dynasty was also known for the development of CI poetry, which was characterized by its use of fixed musical tunes. CI poetry often explored themes of longing, separation, and the passage of time, and it became increasingly popular in the later Tang period. The Tang poets were deeply influenced by the social and political climate of their time, and their works often reflected the challenges and complexities of the empire. The Tang Dynasty was a time of great political and social change, and poets used their words to comment on the state of the empire, the lives of the common people, and the behavior of the ruling class. Tang poetry, with its blend of personal expression and social critique, continues to be studied and admired to this day. The Tang Dynasty was a period of immense cultural and artistic achievement, particularly in the realms of visual arts and architecture. Tang art, which drew upon both indigenous Chinese traditions and foreign influences, became known for its boldness, richness, and sophistication. This era saw the flourishing of Buddhist art, the production of intricate tomb sculptures, and the development of distinctive painting and pottery styles. One of the most notable forms of Tang art was the creation of Tang tomb figurines. These glazed ceramic figures, which were placed in the tombs of the elite, depict a wide variety of subjects, including animals, soldiers, dancers, court officials, and musicians. The figurines were created with remarkable attention to detail, and many were brightly painted, giving them a lively and realistic appearance. The Tang tomb figurines provide valuable insight into the clothing, weapons, and daily life of the period and remain some of the most iconic works of Tang art. In addition to tomb sculptures, the Tang Dynasty also saw the rise of large-scale Buddhist sculptures and murals. These artworks, found in temples and caves, often depicted scenes from the life of the Buddha, as well as Buddhist deities and bodhisattvas. The Dunhuang Cave Complex, located along the ancient Silk Road, is home to some of the most famous examples of Tang Buddhist art. The murals in the Dunhuang Caves are noted for their vibrant colors, intricate details, and ability to convey complex religious narratives. These artworks were influenced by both Indian and Central Asian artistic traditions and represent the blending of cultures along the Silk Road. Tang Dynasty painting was another area of cultural flourishing. Early Tang painters were influenced by the painting traditions of the Han Dynasty and the Buddhist art of Central Asia. One of the most famous Tang painters was Wu Daozi, who is considered one of China's greatest painters. Wu Daozi was known for his bold, dynamic style, which focused on expressive figures and sweeping compositions. His paintings often depicted Buddhist themes, but his influence can also be seen in later Chinese landscape painting. Tang architecture was equally impressive, particularly in the development of Buddhist temples and the construction of palaces. Tang architecture combined elements of traditional Chinese design with influences from Central Asia and India. The most famous example of Tang architecture is the giant Wild Goose Pagoda in Xi'an, which was built to house Buddhist scriptures brought back from India by the famous monk Xuanzang. The pagoda's design reflects the blend of Chinese and foreign architectural styles that characterized the Tang period. The Tang Dynasty also saw the construction of impressive city walls, fortifications, and public buildings. Chang'an, the Tang capital, was one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world at the time. Its design was influenced by both Chinese and Central Asian architectural styles and featured wide streets, large public squares, and majestic palaces. The city was a symbol of the empire's grandeur and cultural openness, and it became a hub for art, commerce, and intellectual exchange. Tang Dynasty pottery and ceramics were renowned for their innovation, craftsmanship, and decorative style. The period saw the development of new glazing techniques, as well as the mass production of ceramics for both domestic and export markets. Tang pottery was highly diverse, ranging from practical household items to elaborate ceremonial pieces. The Tang period also saw the rise of large-scale ceramic production, which made pottery more widely accessible. One of the most iconic forms of Tang ceramics is the Sankai glaze, a distinctive three-colored glaze that became popular during the Tang Dynasty. Sankai ceramics were often used for tomb figures, vases, and decorative pieces, and they featured bright, vibrant colors, including green, yellow, and brown. The Sankai technique was inspired by the Persian glaze tradition, and its use of bright colors and intricate designs became a hallmark of Tang pottery. The Sankai ceramics produced during the Tang Dynasty are among the most famous and prized examples of Chinese pottery. In addition to Sankai ceramics, the Tang Dynasty also produced high-quality porcelain. The Tang period saw the emergence of fine porcelain kilns in regions such as Jingdezhen, which would later become known for its porcelain production in later dynasties. Tang porcelain was highly prized for its purity, translucency, and delicate designs. Tang porcelain pieces were exported along the Silk Road to Central Asia, the Middle East, and even as far as Europe, where they were admired for their beauty and craftsmanship. Tang ceramics were not only valued for their aesthetic qualities, but also for their practical uses. Pottery items such as storage jars, cooking vessels, and drinking cups were essential parts of daily life in the Tang Empire. The Tang period's advancements in pottery technology and design had a lasting impact on Chinese ceramics, and its influence can still be seen in the ceramic traditions of later dynasties. The Tang Dynasty's political structure was based on a highly centralized government, which allowed the emperors to exert control over a vast empire stretching from Central Asia to the Korean Peninsula. Centralization of power was crucial for maintaining order, collecting taxes, administering justice, and managing military affairs. The Tang government was a sophisticated bureaucracy that worked efficiently in many aspects, ensuring the empire's prosperity and stability for centuries. At the top of the political hierarchy was the emperor, who was considered the son of heaven and held ultimate authority over all matters of state. The emperor's role was not only political but also religious, as he was seen as the intermediary between heaven and earth. The emperor was expected to rule with wisdom, justice, and fairness, ensuring the well-being of the people. His mandate to rule was derived from the concept of the mandate of heaven, which posited that the emperor's right to govern was granted by divine forces, but could be revoked if he failed to govern justly. The Tang emperors appointed officials to manage the various aspects of governance, including military affairs, taxation, law enforcement, and public works. These officials were typically chosen based on merit through the civil service examination system, which was developed and refined during the Tang period. The system of governance was divided into multiple levels, from central ministries to local governments, each with its own responsibilities and scope of authority. The central government was divided into 6 ministries, each responsible for a specific area of governance. These ministries were the Ministry of Personnel, responsible for appointing officials, the Ministry of Revenue, which oversaw taxation and finances, the Ministry of Rights, which managed ceremonial and religious affairs, the Ministry of Defense, which coordinated military affairs, the Ministry of Justice, which handled legal matters, and the Ministry of Works, which oversaw infrastructure and public works. This highly organized bureaucratic system helped maintain stability and efficiency, but it also created opportunities for corruption and power struggles. As the Tang Dynasty progressed, power struggles within the court, particularly involving eunuchs and factions, began to destabilize the government and erode the centralized control of the emperor. While the Tang emperors and their bureaucracy played a central role in governance, the aristocracy and military governors also had significant influence over the political landscape of the empire. The aristocracy, composed of noble families and officials who held land and power, was an essential part of Tang society. These aristocrats often held important positions in the imperial court, and many were responsible for local governance in regions far from the capital. The power of the aristocracy was evident in the way the Tang government was structured. The highest-ranking officials in the imperial court were often drawn from noble families, and many of these aristocrats held vast estates, controlled local militias, and had significant influence over regional politics. The aristocracy played a key role in maintaining the social order and reinforcing Confucian values. But they also posed challenges to the emperor's power, as their loyalty was often tied more to family ties and personal interests than to the central government. Military governors, known as jidushi, were another crucial component of the Tang political system. These governors were appointed by the emperor to oversee military affairs in distant regions, particularly along the empire's borders or in frontier regions. Initially, the jidushi were seen as essential to maintaining control over these territories, but over time, many of them grew more powerful and began to act independently from the central government. The jidushi system allowed military commanders to have considerable authority in their regions. They controlled local armies, collected taxes, and had the power to govern their territories without direct interference from the emperor. This growing autonomy among the jidushi weakened the power of the central government and contributed to the eventual fragmentation of the Tang Empire in the 9th and 10th centuries. By the time of the Lushan Rebellion in 755, the military governors had become increasingly influential, and their power only grew after the rebellion, as the emperor was no longer able to maintain control over the empire's military and regional affairs. This decentralization of power was one of the key factors in the Tang Dynasty's decline, as it led to internal conflicts and the rise of local warlords, eventually leading to the fall of the dynasty. One of the most important legacies of the Tang Dynasty was the development and refinement of the civil service examination system, which allowed the empire to select government officials based on merit rather than family background. This system revolutionized Chinese governance and played a key role in shaping the future of imperial China. The civil service examination system was initially established during the Sui Dynasty, 581 to 618, but it was during the Tang Dynasty that the system was expanded and formalized. The purpose of the exams was to identify the most capable and knowledgeable individuals to serve in the imperial bureaucracy. The exams tested candidates on their knowledge of Confucian classics, philosophy, literature, and law, and success in these exams could lead to prestigious government positions. The Tang Dynasty civil service system was based on the idea that government officials should be chosen for their abilities and moral integrity, rather than their social class or family connections. The exams were open to all men, regardless of their family background, which allowed individuals from lower social classes to rise through the ranks of the government. This meritocratic system helped ensure that talented individuals, rather than just aristocrats or hereditary officials, could hold important positions in the bureaucracy. However, while the system was a step toward greater social mobility, it was still heavily influenced by Confucian ideals, which favored those with the time and resources to study for the exams. The system was also complex and could be costly, making it difficult for common people to participate without financial backing. As a result, the civil service examination system primarily benefited the wealthy and educated elite. Despite these limitations, the civil service examination system had a profound impact on Chinese governance. It helped create a more professional and educated bureaucracy, which improved the efficiency of the government. It also encouraged a culture of scholarship and intellectualism, as aspiring candidates dedicated themselves to studying Confucian classics and preparing for the exams. The examination system became a cornerstone of Chinese governance for centuries, continuing to shape the selection of government officials during later dynasties, such as the Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties. The civil service exams remained in place until the late 19th century, making them one of the most enduring aspects of Chinese political culture. As the Tang Dynasty reached the height of its power, its wealth and economic system were initially robust, underpinned by a vast and efficient bureaucracy, a productive agricultural sector, and active trade routes that stretched from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. However, the decline of the Tang Dynasty was marked by a series of economic difficulties that weakened its ability to maintain control over the empire. One of the key factors contributing to the economic decline was the rising fiscal burden placed on the state. The Tang government relied on agricultural taxation to fund its administration and military, but as the empire expanded, the cost of maintaining a large bureaucracy and military apparatus became unsustainable. In particular, the cost of defending the empire's extensive borders and providing for an increasingly luxurious court drained the imperial treasury. Additionally, the equal field system, which had been designed to ensure fair land distribution and equitable tax collection, began to falter. Originally, the system allocated land based on family size and the ability to cultivate the land. This helped to maintain agricultural productivity and created a relatively equal tax base. Over time, however, the system became corrupted. Large landowners, often members of the aristocracy, managed to bypass the system by either acquiring more land through inheritance or manipulating the law to their advantage. As a result, the unequal distribution of land led to tax evasion and a decrease in the revenue that the government could collect. The central government's inability to collect sufficient taxes further compounded the financial difficulties. As local military governors, known as judushi, grew in power and autonomy, they began to siphon off taxes and resources for their own benefit. This decentralization of power meant that the central government lost control over large parts of the economy, making it harder to collect taxes and manage public resources effectively. The decline of the Tang economy also coincided with agricultural crises, including flooding and droughts, which caused widespread famine. The failure of crop production and the inability of the government to provide relief to affected regions resulted in peasant uprisings and discontent across the empire. These revolts, fueled by economic hardship, further weakened the dynasty and contributed to its eventual fragmentation. The fiscal challenges of the Tang Dynasty were compounded by the luxury and extravagance of the imperial court. As the emperor's power began to wane, the court was dominated by eunuchs and corrupt officials who siphoned off-state funds for their own personal gain. The lavish spending of the elite, coupled with the inability to address widespread poverty, created significant discontent among the common people. One of the most significant internal challenges to the stability of the Tang Dynasty was the increasing power of eunuchs within the imperial court. Eunuchs, who had traditionally held roles in the palace as servants, castrated men who were trusted to serve in close proximity to the emperor, slowly rose to power and became key players in court politics. Over time, they accumulated enormous influence, often surpassing that of the emperor's ministers. Eunuchs were able to wield so much power because they had access to the emperor and could influence decisions behind the scenes. They used their position to control key government appointments, manipulate imperial succession, and amass vast wealth. Their involvement in state affairs was one of the key factors that led to the court's increasing corruption. As eunuchs became more entrenched in the political system, they undermined the authority of the emperor and contributed to the growing dysfunction within the imperial government. The eunuchs' power peaked during the reign of Emperor Xuanzong, R. 712 to 756, whose early reign was marked by prosperity and cultural flourishing. However, by the time of his later years, the eunuchs had gained substantial control over the court, influencing decisions related to appointments, military strategy, and public policy. This concentration of power in the hands of eunuchs created an atmosphere of intrigue and infighting at the Tang court. The eunuchs' interference in state affairs reached its peak during the reign of Empress Wu Zetian, r. 690 to 705, who herself relied on eunuchs to maintain her hold on power. The rise of eunuchs during her reign contributed to the court's increasing corruption and internal strife. Their dominance over the emperor's personal affairs and the selection of officials weakened the central authority and left the empire vulnerable to instability. Eunuchs also played a critical role during the later years of the Tang Dynasty, particularly during the Lushan Rebellion, 755 to 763. The rebellion, which began as a military uprising led by the general in Lushan, highlighted the internal divisions and inefficiencies within the Tang government. The eunuchs' power struggles further distracted the central government's ability to effectively manage the crisis. While the rebellion was eventually suppressed, it had lasting consequences for the dynasty, as it exposed the fragility of the Tang government. In addition to the eunuchs, factions within the imperial court, such as the aristocracy and the military, were also vying for power. These factions often clashed, leading to frequent purges, political manipulation, and corruption. As a result, the once efficient Tang bureaucracy became riddled with inefficiency, and the empire's ability to govern effectively diminished. The Lushan Rebellion, 755 to 763, was a pivotal event in the history of the Tang Dynasty and a major factor in its eventual collapse. The rebellion began as a military revolt led by the general in Lushan, who was stationed on the empire's northern frontier. Lushan, originally a trusted military commander in the Tang army, had grown increasingly dissatisfied with the Tang central government. Taking advantage of the political instability and corruption within the imperial court, he launched a revolt against the Tang Dynasty. Lushan's rebellion was devastating for the Tang Dynasty. It is estimated that over 1 million people died during the rebellion, either from direct military conflict or from the famine and disease that followed. Lushan's forces captured the Tang capital, Chang'an, and briefly took control of much of northern China. The Tang emperor, Xuanzong, was forced to flee the capital, and his government was severely weakened. The rebellion exposed the vulnerabilities of the Tang military, which had been stretched thin and was unable to effectively respond to Lushan's forces. The military was divided, and many of the Jadushi military governors, who had grown increasingly powerful during the Tang period, were slow to come to the aid of the emperor. The rebellion also highlighted the deep-seated corruption and inefficiency within the Tang court, where eunuchs and factions had weakened the emperor's authority. Although the rebellion was eventually suppressed after 8 years of bloody conflict, the Tang Dynasty was never the same. The central government's power had been significantly reduced, and the dynasty's ability to maintain control over its vast territories was weakened. After the rebellion, the Tang Dynasty entered a period of instability marked by internal conflict, rebellions, and the increasing influence of regional military governors. The empire's decentralization accelerated, and many regions became effectively autonomous. The aftermath of the Lushan Rebellion also saw the rise of the Jadushi as powerful regional warlords, which further undermined the authority of the emperor. While the Tang Dynasty continued to exist for nearly a century after the rebellion, its collapse was inevitable, as it struggled to cope with the combined pressures of internal division, economic decline, and military fragmentation. The decline of the Tang was completed by the rise of regional powers, and in 907, the last Tang emperor was overthrown by the military governor Yuan, who established the later Yuan Dynasty, marking the official end of the Tang Empire. Despite the eventual decline and fall of the Tang Dynasty, its influence on Chinese history, culture, and governance remained profound and far-reaching. The legacy of the Tang Dynasty shaped not only the subsequent Chinese dynasties, but also other East Asian civilizations. The political, economic, and cultural achievements of the Tang period set the foundation for many of the structures and institutions that persisted throughout Chinese imperial history. One of the most significant legacies of the Tang Dynasty was its emphasis on centralized governance and the development of the imperial bureaucracy. The civil service examination system, which was established and refined during the Tang period, continued to shape Chinese governance for centuries. Success in the exams, based on knowledge of Confucian classics, became the primary means of selecting government officials, and the meritocratic principle it embodied was a significant innovation in the history of Chinese bureaucracy. The civil service system remained a defining feature of Chinese administration throughout the Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties. The Tang's legal code also had a lasting impact. The Tang Code, which outlined criminal law, administrative regulations, and civil rights, became a model for future Chinese legal systems. Many of its principles, including its focus on fairness and the role of the state in maintaining social order, influenced the legal frameworks of later dynasties, as well as the legal systems of neighboring countries such as Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Beyond the political realm, the Tang Dynasty's cultural achievements laid the groundwork for the flourishing of art, literature, and philosophy in later Chinese history. Tang poetry, with its emphasis on vivid imagery and emotional depth, set the standard for Chinese poetry for centuries. Poets such as Li Bai, Du Fu, Wang Wei, and Bai Jui became revered figures whose works were studied by scholars in later periods. The Tang period also saw the development of distinct visual arts, including ceramics, sculpture, and painting. The influence of Tang art, particularly in the realms of Buddhist sculpture and tomb figurines, continued to resonate in later dynasties, influencing artistic styles and iconography. The Tang Dynasty's cultural reach extended beyond China. The spread of Buddhism, which reached its zenith during the Tang period, had a lasting impact on East Asia. Chinese Buddhist missionaries and scholars helped establish the religion in Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, where it took on different forms and became an integral part of each country's culture. Additionally, the Tang capital of Chang'an, modern Zan, was a cosmopolitan hub, attracting merchants, diplomats, and travelers from across Asia and beyond. The cultural exchange that occurred in Chang'an laid the foundation for the Silk Road's role as a conduit for the movement of goods, ideas, and religious beliefs between the East and West. The Tang Dynasty's contributions to the world of art and architecture had a profound and lasting influence, shaping the aesthetic and cultural heritage of China for centuries. The Tang period was marked by artistic innovation, with a focus on bold, expressive forms and vibrant colors. Tang art was heavily influenced by Buddhism, which had spread widely throughout China during the period, and this influence is seen in the religious sculptures, paintings, and architectural structures that were created during this time. Tang Buddhist art reached new heights of sophistication, particularly in the creation of large-scale sculptures and murals. The Dunhuang Caves, located along the ancient Silk Road, are some of the most famous examples of Tang Buddhist art. The murals and statues found in these caves depict scenes from the life of the Buddha, as well as Buddhist deities and bodhisattvas. The vibrant colors and intricate detail of these artworks reflect the flourishing of Buddhist culture during the Tang period and the empire's role as a cultural crossroads, where artistic styles from Central Asia and India were integrated with indigenous Chinese traditions. In terms of architecture, the Tang Dynasty saw the construction of monumental buildings, such as the giant Wild Goose Pagoda in Chang'an, which was built to house Buddhist scriptures brought back from India by the monk Xuanzang. The architectural style of the Tang period combined traditional Chinese elements with influences from Central Asia and India, resulting in structures that were both grand and functional. Tang architecture was characterized by its use of wood, tile, and brick, as well as its emphasis on symmetry and harmony. The design of the Tang capital, Chang'an, was also a significant achievement in urban planning. The city was laid out in a grid pattern with wide streets, large public squares, and impressive gates and walls. It was designed to reflect the imperial order, with the emperor's palace at the center, surrounded by government buildings, markets, and residential districts. Chang'an was one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world during the Tang period and became a model for other cities in China and beyond. Tang literature also had a lasting influence on Chinese culture. The works of Tang poets, in particular, set the standard for Chinese poetry for centuries. Li Bai's romantic and free-spirited verses, Du Fu's socially conscious poetry, and Wang Wei's landscape poetry all became central to the Chinese literary tradition. The Tang Dynasty's literary achievements were not limited to poetry. The period also saw the development of prose, including the creation of historical texts, philosophical treatises, and works of fiction.